All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today is the 26th of February, 2026. Um, my last video I was recorded was on the topic of a Mercury retrograde in Pisces. Today I will be talking about the lunar eclipse that is set to happen uh, in a coming up soon. I have to record this. The moon is in Cancer, and it's only two signs away from its eclipse in Virgo, which will be the last of the eclipses in Virgo and Pisces, as that we are transitioning into the eclipse cycle with Leo and Aquarius. Um, with this in mind, to begin delineating something like this, the most obvious and important thing to consider is the elemental associations of earth and water versus fire and air, having to do with this basic yin and yang, binary light and dark kind of association. And that, so we can see the transition moment that we're in, having been through a cycle of eclipses in Virgo, an earth sign, and Pisces, a water sign, as having to do with the material, the physical, as well as the emotional, and how sometimes there may be different personality types based on your astrology, may be anchored or geared in certain directions more than another, right? And one of the things is what's interesting about this series of eclipses is that I have been within my own family melodramas or whatever that I've seen over the years. There's all sorts of like dynamics where drama between my mother and her sister, being one being a Virgo, one being a Pisces, and that being an opposition, or drama between my dad and his brother, one being a Aquarius, one being a Leo. And so there's all these sort of like, with astrology, I find it helpful because if you understand, like, you're caught up in like, oftentimes it's just some bullshit, but if you understand that there are, astrology is real, astrology works, and the oppositions and the polarities, for whatever reason, if you're like, why are these people like, it seems like this is more, there's some sort of melodrama that's being fueled by like some Greek myth of like like you guys are seized by some kind of archetype and playing out some silly drama, and is, oh well, that's obvious because you've got these oppositions going on, right? And part of the problem here, right, when you get down to this, is that if you look at astrology, is that, and tarot and this esoteric system of, the idea is that you're contemplating these things, and you're contemplating these like subdivisions of things into different elements and stuff like that, is that it gives you a kind of a map of things that are going on. So often people complain about the dualism or whatever. With this, we take it a step further, and we've got split into four parts, basically drawn and quartered, if you will. And we've got the fire and air being the intellect and the higher imagination, if you will. The kind of the spiritual, more of a visionary force to visualize a certain, like the wand is like a direction, to point a direction and kind of lead the way, kind of, and visual, there's a more of a, spirit is inspirational. To be inspired is to like motivate, to move action. So there's a kind of a physical moving as well as a spiritual quality to fire, and air is about the communications. If I'm making a video like this, I'm using the element of air by taking up air space, by taking up a chunk of time that would have otherwise been silent and quiet, and I'm gonna babble on through it, creating a bunch of words coming out of my mouth, filling up the room, right? So these are and there's a certain yanginess of these elements compared to the yin elements And so this marks a pivotal turning point, basically, where the lunations are basically taking care of business with these little tension points of melodrama before shifting into a different direction. And what's amazing about this is that since we all have multiple placements in our chart, that we can see how these are going to get set off in different ways and predict how the melodrama is going to evolve into the future, basically, right? That, and part of the problem about this is I'm just going to, I have to admit, I can only use what is directly at hand and relevant that comes to mind, and a lot of this is wrapped up, unfortunately, with the fact that I am it feels somehow embarrassing to be an adult and live with my mother, but the truth is that my father passed away quite a while ago, and my mother is getting older, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm dealing with is just, it doesn't, it's better, I think it's better tact to respect the fact that, when people are old and elderly and, senior years, like, how much can you really expect from people anyways, right? And that maybe with Virgo, there's some perfectionistic, kind of critical, like, I mean, it's colors a lot of where I'm going with this, but my mother's paid me to look at her chart and stuff like this before. She's got a lot of Leo placements, and so I'm just, for me in personal, as I understand this, with the moon ruling my mother and all this stuff going on, there's going to be a lot of, like, as we transition, we're going to have there's going to be a lot of Leo, power dynamics of, if the fire is like the wand being like, I'm the one who holds the wand, wave it around, point the direction, and say what we're doing, then when you got somebody with a whole lineup of Leo placements, they want to be the one that's in that position. They want to be the one in the driver's seat, driving the car, and they don't want other people doing that. It's just, there's something about the Leo mentality where it's like, if you try to take the bone away from the dog's gonna bite you, right? And this is why the strength card in tarot is associated with Leo, is because it's like, you're gonna be like taming the animal, but there's some basic, like, if you have Leo versus Aquarius, you've got a sign that is more animalistic in its symbol, and a sign that's more human, and so we're moving away from this material emotional thing into a new cycle that has more to do with, like, a rational humanitarian thing versus the power dynamic of the dog with the bone in its mouth that's going to snap at you if you try to take the bone and go, whoa, okay. And it's like, there's basically, I can kind of use the eclipses to diagnose a problem that there's basically, you have to stay it helps people to stay in a rational frame of mind where you can, like, talk about things rationally, because a lot of the power dynamics end up just playing out at this level where people are just snapping at each other for no reason, like a bunch, like, but it's like if you see animals in packs or something, right? You have a bunch of, like, animals that, like, certain dogs will get along together and certain dogs won't, and then they'll start snapping at each other and, like, having these little territorial, but it's not really over. If you want to reduce everything down to what is just going to be, like, objectively material, this is the appeal of, like, I think Virgo, and having this, like, Mercury being in Virgo. Mercury likes being like, we're just going to be clear and rational, because if we break things down into, like, material units, something that you can put on the accounting sheet, or, like, we can make an inventory of your rations, and we can plan a calendar, like, in a very pragmatic, practical way. Virgo likes that. But with this eclipse cycle, we've got Mercury in Pisces, and there's something about, like, there's the problem that what you are, it's not as simple as that, because there's these other dimensions where, if you factor in emotional stuff, there's the emotional investment and sentimentality may play a lot more into certain equations than actual bare material resources, right? But the thing is, there's something about this is what do you, when you start talking about emotions and sentimentality, is this something that is subjective? Is this something that is relative? Is this something that is inherently illusory or less real than some sort of like hardline material pragmatism? And these are the sort of some of the tensions between water and earth that are playing out. And in the midst of my trying to, in the midst of this crazy environment, this crazy year that we're in 2026, one of my coping mechanisms has been to try to give myself other things to do than to doom scroll. So I've been avoiding, but I still like, use the internet a little bit, but I'm trying to minimize my doom scrolling. And one of the techniques that I've employed is I've combined it with, perhaps you could like, I have to admit, this is a sensitive or a point of contention, because one of the people that I really like for when it comes to astrology and Jungian stuff, the archetypal psychologist James Hillman has a huge influence on me. I'm really into James Hillman. And James Hillman, one of the things I love about James Hillman is that he has this like criticism of like, pop psychology, self-help, of like where it's going. And the thing is, what he stands for is like a throwback back to the days of like, the guy actually worked directly with Carl Jung, right? Just studied with the dude himself, like under the direct lineage of going to Switzerland and doing all that stuff. And it's just, there's something that I feel, you don't have to like agree or accept with all of that psychoanalytic tradition, but when you compare it to like the pop psychology of the day, it seems like something has been lost, right? And I admit that there is a certain strain of neo-reactionary thought that is like anti-modernism because of this. But like maybe there is some sort of truth to this, because there is like, in the sense of like institutification, like there was once certain things that seemed to be like had some sort of like value or sustenance, or like there's some kind of like real thing going on, and now it's just been like turned into some crappy equivalent of this. And one of the like James Hillman was railing against people that would be selling courses on how to like solve your financial problems, but like to spiritualize it. And like, it's just like, it's completely like spend more money on fluffing up so you go into more debt trying to like clear up your debt like, or how brainless is that? I don't know. That's my criticism anyways. But the or the turning some sort of like psychological self-help project into cleaning up your closet, which would ironically, after Hillman's death, that was Peterson rode that train to success, to clean up your closet courses, as if it was some sort of higher ideal of like, the big daddy who represents the lost order that's fallen to the woes of modernity or something like this, right? And so there's this thing about like, I have a certain pet peeve with all this kind of stuff, but I have realized, I had this funny idea that like, what if to revision this whole process as Marie Kondo Ultra, basically, right? That it's like, you are like, to play off MK Ultra, it's like the life-changing magic of tidying up. Like, what if there is actually life-changing magic of tidying up and just submitting yourself to a kind of like this like super ego control structure that says, you are, I have to also admit that like Gurdjieff is kind of funny for this, because if you listen to this Gurdjieff, if you guys want a good intro to Gurdjieff, there's this Gurdjieff advice to his daughter, and there's some people spiritual teachers have strip mined this little thing for gems and then pass that off as if it's their own inspiration. And the like, you can see like, it's just, the whole thing is just a bunch of fucking con artists ripping each other. So Gurdjieff himself probably ripped some of this off, I bet, right? But it's just like, oh, there's some real wonderful tidbits in all this, but some of it like you have to just listen to it and like it may be a bit like sandpaper in the sense that maybe some of them will rub you in a different way than others and create more friction. But there's certain things about it where there is this kind of funny thing about like the morality of how much space you're taking up and how much just possessions you have and just like the problem with clutter and all this kind of stuff, and to be like, this is my moral duty, like why am I wasting so much space if there's such a crisis around housing, there are people starving in the streets and all this kind of stuff, and like I have to devote a whole room to a bunch of bullshit for no reason basically, and then just look at my phone all day, which you could be doing at a fucking bus station, right? It doesn't make any sense at all. So there's this certain annoyance of just being like, oh, I'm a pig and I just live in a fucking mansion full of a bunch of fucking bullshit, and I don't even I'm not happy with the situation. Like, can we just fucking liquefy and get the fuck out of here, please? Like, that's what there's this underlying pressure to just like sell. I just want to fucking sell the shit, move on. Fucking, I don't know what I'll do. But no, we can't. We have to fucking just like. There's also Franz Kafka. One of the things about like Kafka turning into the bug is that Kafka was overcome with this urge to just like take the room and empty it of everything so that he could like crawl around like a bug over all the walls or something like that. And I have to admit that, just as in case you guys, I'm just going to warn you that I'm the kind of person who has been into, like, I don't know, William S. Burroughs and the Beat Generation, and in David Cronenberg, there's this whole thing about the bug high, right? That like there's some kind of Kafka. There's this Kafka strain that runs through, like Cronenberg, Burroughs, Deleuze and Guattari, and even I guess maybe McLuhan. Even maybe McLuhan is a bit on. Like McLuhan was saying that the whole fixation of American car culture is like the carapace, the carapace. You have an armored shell of a beetle, and you have basically a kind of insectoid culture where you're all like these like the drone bees flying into the hive, and you have to like do this repetitive thing every day, and you become like in like these kind of like pod capsule, hard shell like insect people, right? And so there's a certain kind of like bug brain thing to all this where you're like, bottom line is the dollar sign, and I just need to scuttle around in my little beetle armor or whatever, right? There's like a Japanese thing where there's like beetle guy who rode around on a motorcycle, and I think that's what they were going for as well, right? Like this basically like you're just gonna like fucking beetle storm it down the highway at 1,000,000 miles an hour, like, and this I got the goggles and everything. So you get like the bug splats as you're going high speed or whatever. This is kind of this is the aesthetic. I'm not really sure what I'm saying about the what I'm trying to tidying up, right? The beetle, the bug represents, like Burroughs was an exterminator. There's a certain kind of there's an underlying you transform into the beetle like Kafka, and when you're in bug brain beetle mode, you just want to like discharge all the bullshit, the urge to purge basically, and just deterritorialization, right? There's something about liberalism that in order to just like you feel uncomfortable having, or basically also a sense that maybe you are going to be the people who the populists have their crosshairs on you, and they're going to liquidate you and your whole family. And that, unfortunately, what was Kafka doing? He was like a Jewish guy in Czech. What is it? What? He was a Czech Jewish guy, and he died of illness before it got really bad with all the anti-Semitism. But there's a certain kind of underlying just like fear of anti-Semitism, and I don't know. Like these are kind of like this, like there's a certain level of like what you're doing as I'm going to take care of business in terms of like the brass tacks of like the material reality of the situation. And then when you get into start doing that, you start realizing, well, wait a minute, there could be a lot of that like whether I'm throwing this thing in the garbage or whether I'm selling it to some guy for $300, is a lot of this has to do less with the hard material reality, but an emotional investment. And there's a certain kind of like being in this state with the self node in Virgo of just like wanting to just like the urge to purge, let's just get rid of it all and I'm done here kind of thing. But it's also good to be, if you give into that, you become the screaming Beetle man on the motorcycle going down the highway at a million miles an hour. And what I'm here to remind you guys is that if you want to do that, don't let me stop you, but I have a certain decelerationist perspective on the situation, that if that is a certain inevitability, like maybe there's actually some wisdom in, having one foot on the brake, kind of not going so fast with it and just like taking your time. And patience is a virtue, basically. Because I'm just watching. I have to also admit that I am a part of the Kafka bug brain syndrome is related to being a schizo and bipolar and all this. And I've hung out with enough, people that are like this to recognize that one of the symptoms, unfortunately, is like urgency, right? There's a sense of like pressure and urgency where if you have to do everything like right now really fast or else or something, and it's like that. It helps to just recognize that is like life doesn't have to be so urgent. You don't have to do everything right now, and you can kind of just like slow down and take it easy. And one of the things that I find is helpful for this is specifically the I Ching, because there's something about like if you have a basic knack for that, like if you were going to ask an oracle a question and one of the possible answers that it could give you would be like, well, you're not wrong, but you don't have to scream down the highway in fucking beetle scuttle mode at a million miles an hour. You can kind of fucking chill out a bit, man. Like if you can kind of see that could be like a possible response, and that like if a lot of the time that could actually be like that could be like a subcategory where there's a lot of responses that the inventory system could give you, and they could all just be variations about like, yeah, you're right, but also chill the fuck out, okay? Chill out, and you don't have to rush. Good things come to those who wait, or whatever, right? So just chill the fuck out, basically, right? So I think these are sort of some of the blessings of there's a certain why I like the I Ching probably more than the average person, and I've also have this like I have to admit that since I've managed to introduce the fact of like I wasn't expecting to go into Kafka bug brain schizophrenia mode for this one, but I'm wearing the glasses, and it does remind me of like going down the highway really fast. There's something about this where it's like I have to admit that a lot of what I'm doing with this channel is that I do have an interest in things like the esoteric, the occult, or there's certain kind of paranormal things, but based in what I've learned to understand is that oftentimes there's a challenge in that the paranormal is like things that are outside the accepted social container, right? And I'm bringing this up because it reminds me of this whole thing about the Virgo as being very oriented to the Mercury likes Virgo because at a pragmatic material level, you can do accounting. You can count. You can account for what's going on, and things are manageable, and it makes sense in a way that then when you get into, but then when you flip it into this like realm of more emotional attachment to things, and it's like maybe more subjective. There's something about this where it seems more illusory, or like Pisces, like a dream. It's like Pisces is the groggy-minded daydream state, and Virgo is a certain kind of like, calculating rationality in comparison, right? And the problem about this is, where am I going with this? Hold on. With being, when you introduce the problem of schizophrenia into this, psychotic delusion, is that if you only approach life from this really materialistic perspective, then it's like it's not that there are one sphere of influence, or one of these elements is true and all the other ones are false, but or that the thing is also this kind of problem about balance is that if you pay attention to the way astrology works, is that the dynamic in astrology is precisely because things are not balanced. Things are not, you can have 4 different elements and things are not just evenly distributed in each corner. So a lot of times you're just going to have everything piled up in one area, and it's just like, oh, this one element wants to steal the whole show for itself, and we're just going to do everything this way, and we're just going to deny that all these other realities exist. So that you're like, we have hard material reality, but if you want to play fire and you want to be like, oh, I'm inspired and I want to do something, well, welcome to fucking setting yourself on fire and going up in flames. You know, fry your brains out, right? Because we don't do that around here. It's all just fucking count the fucking balance sheet on the accountant thing, and if you have an inspiration and an idea, you're going to have to just go like light yourself on fire outside of as a protest, basically, right? Or that if you have some sort of thing you want to communicate, you know, bottom line is the dollar sign. You got to show us your balance sheet on your accounting before we're going to give you the airtime to say it, to communicate your message. And if it doesn't make us money, we're not going to let you to say it, right? So like this kind of, you have this, if one element tries to just strangle out the rest of it, there's also this sort of denial where it's like, oh, if you want to like price out, if you want to price out like old retro video games, you're going to be like, each thing is going to be priced based on the value of the transistors, so that when we recycle it and break it down to its components, we can, and what those components are worth at the market value, like that's how we're going to price it. It doesn't matter that you know, somebody who paid 300 or whatever, like you paid $100 for a Final Fantasy cartridge back in the day. They're all just going to be like materially objective of what it's worth, not whether it's a popular game or not. It's just plastic and metal in a cartridge. It doesn't mean anything, right? And there's this sort of like, if you take any one of these perspectives and like take it so that it denies the validity of the other ones, it doesn't make any sense, right? And so there's I think there's kind of, when you apply this to like Marie Kondo Ultra, where it's like, you know, you have to just become like a totalitarian of like, does not create joy in my life, eliminate, exterminate, reject, you know. And then so the point is that if you're into too much the Kafka bug brain, you're just going to be like, you know, and you just want to like discharge everything out of your house and deterritorialize to be like, okay, so I don't feel like an asshole. I'm just a neutral neoliberal subject, you know, just the way you wanted me to be all along. I'm just like a rough gem that I've been thrown into the tumbler, and I've allowed this process to smooth me down, so I don't have these rough, jagged spots that might irritate or create unnecessary, undue friction with the hyper information highway of the system, basically, right? So if you understand what I'm saying, the algorithm is designed to accelerate this process by making any sort of inconsistency as irritating and painful as possible, until you just break down to become Kafka Bugman, to deterritorialize yourself, is what I'm saying, right? What I'm trying to say, but there's something else about all this, where is like if you start paying attention to the other spheres of influence, where it's not just materialism, it's also the emotional awareness, it's also something about what happens in a conversation of airtime, of taking up airspace or whatever, or having inspiration ideas for creative action. If you start to bring in all those, the thing is kind of, there's risks about this because they are intentionally repressed, because people don't want you to be able to do that, right? So because people don't want you to be able to do that, and it's seen as threatening, there's a certain kind of inherent repression on that, and to basically use materialism as a big thing to like a big, I'm going to beat you at the big club if you don't do what I want to do because materialism says so, right? And once you start once you get past the gargoyle on the castle saying that you can't look at the other perspectives on how to deal with life, and you're in there, you're on the other side of the wall of the castle, and you can see what's going on. You have a different perspective on the situation. Then you can begin to relate to these other things in a different way. The problem about this is that this basic repression and the sense of a certain persecution complex around that is what gives rise to schizophrenia, I would say, right? And the problem about being schizophrenic, I'm actually, one of these things about it is that I have difficulty with the idea of schizophrenia, because one of the classic symptoms, the symptoms of schizophrenia has a disavowal of schizophrenia built into them, right? Because you might be having a voice hearing experience, and you're like, oh fuck, I must be schizophrenic, and the voice is like, well, of course you're not schizophrenic, you asshole. This is like, you got to listen to me, and I'm gonna tell you what the fucking secret truth is, and then they're gonna tell you you're schizophrenic because it's crazy, right? So this is the whole point, is that if you're really schizophrenic, the voices aren't gonna tell you you're schizophrenic, right? So the point, if you're that schizophrenic, it becomes redundant, basically, right? There's also Philip K. Dick. Even if you can observe this process and be like, well, this is obviously crazy. I'm obviously not of a sound mind if this is happening. Then just because you are rational enough to understand that doesn't mean that it makes everything go away, and it just you're just like, okay, I guess I'm just in it, and I have to have one way of looking at things that thinks this way, and another way of looking at things that I have to repress because it's like it deals less with this funny, like, materialistic version of reality, and more to do with emotions and sentimentality, and I don't know, different. Like, what actually, there's this whole other way of understanding the world that isn't materialism, that people apparently they just don't want you to talk about. They just don't want to go there, and because they don't want, if there's any power, like, the whole point is that they don't want, if there's some power dynamic the more you look at it, the more you deconstruct it, the more they fall apart. No, don't do that, please. Okay, we want, if we don't have that power dynamic, we don't have a way to control you, basically, right? I mean, this could sound kind of, cliche. Maybe you've heard this stuff before, but whatever, it is what it is. Okay, I'm doing my best with what the situation presents to me. The problem about this, I'm just trying to allude, anyways, to the fact that part of why I'm doing these videos is because, as a person who is probably kind of schizo, maybe a bit, there's certain things that I've experienced that I know better not to talk about this stuff on YouTube. And I think there's something to do with Virgo and privacy, and also I'm gonna just, whatever, it's a part of my chart that has to do with my public life. So for me, when you combine the inherent archetype of Virgo and how it is in my chart, there's something about this where, you might watch this video and just be like, wow, this guy has no filter. He's just telling it all. He cuts loose, and he's just gonna go wild talking about stuff. But actually, this is just an elaborate way of me avoiding a lot of stuff that I know better not to talk about, because following the basic premise that, like, you don't want to talk about the secrets of the fairies. Basically, you don't want to give away the secrets of fairyland, and all this kind of stuff. And the problem is that this creates this problem is that when you're schizo, it leads to schizophrenic withdrawal, where you're just going to be like, okay, well, I recently watched the Ghost in the Shell standalone complex for the first time, and there's this whole thing that they took from J.D. Salinger about, like, so I figured I'd become a deaf mute, or then the laughing man or whatever, and I'll just be a deaf mute and laugh and not talk about anything. And, like, this is obviously, I can't believe it took me so long to get around to that one. And there's a certain irony in this as well, because I recently gave away a copy of J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, and there's some archetype in the Marie Kondo Ultra that I'm realizing is that oftentimes if you're just in this like reject anything that doesn't create joy and just and purge everything, that there's some kind of like I wrote a Substack about this, about how this girlfriend that I had was into the rainbow gathering shit, and there's this rainbow gathering song about how the more that I give, the more I have got to give, and it's like this sort of it's all about the abundance mentality, right? And there's something about this. What I'm realizing is that you can take this thing can be spun in any number of ways, but there's some basic issue around this like purging, giving things up, letting go of attachment, giving things away, and but also like giving and being of service and contributing and all this kind of stuff. There's some kind of thing about that where it's like, what if you're trying to get rid of something that's not done with you yet? And that the things that you were trying to get, like who makes the choices? Like if you're gonna like go through a bunch of stuff and get rid of things, first of all, you can't. It helps that you're not doing this for other people. You're taking care of your own responsibility. But if it's your own responsibility to make your own choice of what you get rid of or let go of or give up, or not, then who's to say you're making the right choice? And who's to say that? What if precisely you're trying to get rid of the things that are like, by trying to give certain things up, you find that you can't, that you actually have an inexhaustible resource of that thing because it keeps coming back to you after you give it up, right? And that there's only a kind of, but like, there's a sort of like weird, it's like this weird inversion law where like you actually, by surrendering, you actually get the thing that you're surrendering. But if you go into it like a jackass and you think that you know that that's how it works and you try to do it, it's not going to work because you have to do it with earnestness. You have to authentically give things up. That you'd be like, I don't have any use to this anymore. I'm going to move on. I don't need it. And just like I got too much of it. Now I got like, what are you doing? Giving like I thought I was trying to give this up, and now you're giving me more of it. And now I got more than I know what to do with it. I've got it in excess. Okay, I'm gonna have to make a like depository, like a resource center for all this shit that I need to give up because I got too much of it, right? I like, and so there's also kind of this dynamic too of like trying to like you're trying to purge yourself of all your bad habits, but then like what if your bad habits are like a store that like this is your economy, this is like you're gonna make a lot of money by all these other people who have bad habits that are gonna give you money to, and you're like, this is not a good way to make money, but you're like dude, you can't give this up, we got tons of it, and you're like here, I want it too, right? And it's like you're like, oh great, we're just got a fucking bumbling beehive of fucking deterritorialized Kafka freaks all ready to just like have a little buzzing economy where people are selling what they don't like and buying what they like. Oh my God, right? It'll just be grotesque. It's like, but this is apparently what you guys want. This is apparently the model, I guess, right? Anyways, I'm just here to try to, if you can handle the Kafka superhighway racing down like you're that. I don't know I'm just trying to. This is. I can't remember the name of the Japanese TV show where the guy's on the Beetle Man on the motorcycle, but I'm stuck with this idea of like that guy, but like Franz Kafka on a motorcycle, and to slow the fuck down, put the foot in the brakes once in a while, buddy. Thanks for watching.